You're there we go. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get started. We'll call the meeting to order. I know we will have a few more folks that pop on, but we've got enough folks to do the meeting right now. So let's go ahead and get started. Heather, could you help us with the roll call? And we just have to remember to say name and where you are located.
Sure. Councilmember Briggs,
Here in Ann Arbor.
Stephen Borgsdorf,
Here in Ann Arbor.
Jennifer Cornell,
She will be late, but she will be
Okay.
here, she said.
Alan Haber,
Here in Ann Arbor briefly.
Sarah Hammerschmidt. Here, Jeffrey Henney,
Here in Ann Arbor.
Rita Mitchell,
Here in Ann Arbor.
Alice Ralph, Frank Wilhelm,
Here in Ann Arbor.
and Adam Zimke.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Okay, great.
Could we have a motion to approve the agenda? It was posted on Legistar.
What is the agenda?
Sorry, Alan.
What is the agenda?
It is just to review comments and approve comments to be sent to the Parks Department on the pros plan. That's it.
Thank you.
So I move to approve.
Thank you. And seconded by
Second.
Councilmember Briggs. All right. All in favor of approving the agenda as written, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Next next is public comment. Heather, do we have any members of the public wishing to speak?
I don't see any hands up at the moment.
Right. In that case, we're going to go right into discussion of the pros plan. At our last meeting, we said that we would like to have feedback provided in about 5 or 7 days after the meeting around the pros plan and comments so that we could hold a special meeting if we deem necessary and work offline around creating some recommendations. There were a couple folks who had some recommendations they wanted to be submitted, and Rita spearheaded the effort along with Alice and I to work heavily on working on some of those comments. Heather, could you send Alice the meeting link?
Sure.
Okay, she just emailed me. Thanks. And so the result of that, I'm going to pull up today for discussion. And so I have a copy of the pros plan as well. We tried to keep this both in a formative and constructive light, and also tried to be really as sort of brief in the areas as possible. There are a number of areas that were highlighted. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So this is a document here, and I will put this link. Well, I can't put it in the chat actually. We will. Heather, could you email the? Or in fact, I will do it. Let's do this here. We will get you a copy of this. Hold on 1 second. Sorry, computer is enjoying the spinning wheel. All right. There we go. Okay. All right. So, right here is the document that highlights a few changes or several changes to the pros plan based on the recommendations and the feedback that we collected. And we started, Rita, I don't know, we started working on this probably well over a week ago, probably 10 days ago now. And it is pretty substantial. And so I'll just go through and I'm going to try and highlight areas of the PROS plan where we suggest these things. And Rita, please feel free to chime in as well, and I'll try to be brief here. So this first section is related to just the geographic boundaries area of the document. This is on page 1, highlights the area, the central area, which is the central business district. That's the section we're dealing with here. And there's some prior PROS plans that were written and reference ratios of population to acreage of park space. And in several of the documents, PROS plans 2016 and 2020 are examples of this. There is a breakdown per planning region or planning area, and that is not in this document. And it really does help indicate some of the differences between park space in different areas of the city. And so we thought that was an important recommendation, and we have both of the comments here are pertaining to that. And I think to move things along, what I'll do is I'll just go, there's 3 pages. So I'll go through the first page and then stop, and we can talk through any questions. So the next area is section C on page 2. And this area deals with the social characteristics of planning areas. And really the comment is similar to the first section. It's just a continuation. This is a chart in this section. So it's population density changes per planning area. So similar concept, just a different area of the document. Next section is on page 19. I'm going to advance here. All right, so page 19, there's a section dealing with the advisory boards, and we have a piece of this. There's a, let's see here. ChemFiles Board Council of Comments right here. And it was thought that it'd be a good idea just to include the boundaries of the center of the city block and enumerate those boundaries. And so we just put those in here: 5th Avenue, William Division, and Liberty Streets, including the parcels that are referenced. So just sort of a clarity thing, especially since this is the first time that this area is introduced in the document. We thought that would make sense to enumerate it here. We don't enumerate it elsewhere. Section B on page 30. Answer that. So this is urban parks and plazas. This is there are several areas of this section that deal with types of parks that the Parks Department manages. And in this section, there are some descriptions around parks in the urban areas or plazas. There's a fairly substantial amount of detail on the plaza portion here. And so we thought that some greater enumeration around the differences of types of space that fall into this classification. So basically, a little more detail around the types of spaces. There are a couple of examples in the bottom section of that, including Liberty Plaza, Sculpture Park, and Forsyth Park. And I think our thought was, just enumerating there are some differences here would be helpful. The next one, and I'll stop after this one, is on page 63. This document is really expansive. So kudos to all of the staff for putting this together, because I have a whole new respect for this planning document in doing so. So on page 63, there is an alternative. This is a section that deals with acquiring property. There's actually several sections that deal with acquiring property here. And there is this one is subheaded as alternative methods. And we thought that the one method of not acquiring property or of acquiring property that is not listed here is the method by which the center of the city block was created, which is the ballot initiative method. And so we thought it was important to just provide a little clarity that designation of land for park use via ballot proposal is also one that has happened in the city. And so I'll stop there for a second because the next section has got a few recommendations, and just pause briefly and see if there's any questions around this first page of recommendations. Okay, hearing none. Sounds good.
Hang on, I think I do. I just want to make sure I understand the proposals. So
Sure.
there's the table at the beginning of section A that in prior pros plans has columns for the different planning areas where you can see the population density and the park acreage by those planning areas. And the proposal is to put that, I guess, put those additional columns back in the table.
Yes, yeah, that's or at least the data that's in the columns.
Okay. Just fine with that. I just want to make sure I understood that. And then the last point about land acquisition, I just want to make sure that we're being precise, because proposal A didn't acquire any land. It designated public land as parkland.
That's a good point.
Are these other methods more directed to the acquisition of land in the first place, or is it kind of an oval peg for a round hole if it's designating already existing public land? I guess I think about it, it's probably okay to include it because it's taking land for whatever purpose and making it into land for a park.
Correct.
But that was sort of maybe give me a moment of pause there to think about that. Is it really accurate to fit in a ballot proposal among these other methods?
So there's a number of methods here. I've got them up on the screen that deal with this. And I hear your point, Stephen. I think that's a fair question.
Well, you know what, those easements and conservation easements, I guess it's similar because it's taking land that could be used for other purposes and saying, all right, there's a way to make it as a natural area or a park. So I withdraw my question, I guess. I think it makes sense to me to include that or suggest that be included as another way to acquire parkland.
Okay, sounds good. Alice, you got your hand up.
Yes, I get Steve's point. I think there is one thing underlying the question of what is a way of acquiring property or way of designating property and so forth. It is public land. It doesn't show on the zoning map as public land, as far as I know. But the distinction throughout the document, I think, often says dedicated parkland or something else, parkland generically. But we need to be clear about what's the differences between designating a public land for a park and having it zoned public land or having it used as a park. This is really arcane differences, but when I don't recall which section where they said a dedicated park rather than a designated park. We probably have already a dedicated park through the ballot measure, but we have not resolved the question as to whether to go through the process of designation. So I think the idea of maybe lumping it into acquiring, but not necessarily designating or dedicating is probably a good idea. And I think Steve, now that Steve seems to be comfortable with it, I'd agree that we need to add that language. Would you repeat the language that you were proposing, Adam?
Yeah, so I think for this section, it would be under section 5, land use plan and acquisition. So I just changed the one word here to clarify that it is around acquisition. Subsection 5 for the alternative methods, which is right here. And just recommending that that there's some language included that indicates acquisition of land for park use via ballot proposal. So basically just.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay. Alan, question on this section.
Yes, well, I have to check out of this. I'm sorry. Basically, my reaction to this is they've completely omitted any recognition of proposal A, that that these public lands are established as a commons that has a unique form of organization. They do not recognize any of the civic center functions. They see this simply as in part of the park view, and there is more than that. How they fail to recognize that there is something new going on. It just feels like that what has been done is canceled out. So I sent out my particular critiques that this should be in the master plan, that there has to be relation with community organizations in the development of what goes on, that there are many functions that need to be seen as part of this development that operate over the next time period, that there's a request for proposals that influences the next time period. All that is just canceled out of this, and I feel very disappointed. Most of what they're doing is very excellent, but this, in terms of what we are dealing with in the center of the city, is not so at all. So I hope you will take a look at the comments that I have made and incorporate them in some appropriate way. But I'm sorry, I have another commitment that I just have to attend to over. So with appreciation for what the effort is, I think that this requires a more critical view while appreciating the good work that is done in terms of what we are dealing with. It completely omits the questions that we are struggling with. I'm sorry, I gotta go.
All right, Alan, you can always submit your comments to Parks as well.
I submitted them as best I could to our group. I hope you will read them. If I will elaborate them more as well. Thank you. Sorry to miss out on the further discussion. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. Alice, did you have anything else in this section, or can I go on?
Just one quick general comment. This isn't a plan for the center of the city. This is a plan for the whole park system and open space availability. I just wanted to mention that.
Sure. And I did go just off camera so that my computer doesn't slow down here, by the way. So section 4, open space parks development contributions within the urban core, this starts on page 66. And so we'll get to that area here. So that's this section right here. There is a number of pieces here that I thought were important to highlight. And so there are 4 recommendations, I think, that I thought were important. So the first one is dealing a lot with the first paragraph, and I think that where we arrived at by the feedback was that this first paragraph had some statements in it that probably conflicted with multiple views of density and how to have density. And so there were some almost like policy statements here. And so we thought that this the recommendation here is that there's consideration to significantly reword this first paragraph or omit it. And because it does really engage in a argument that pits downtown density with open space. And so we thought that there are lots of examples that indicate that there can be both when done well. And so we highlighted a few of the communities we had looked at. Detroit's probably a really great example of this because it is a major downtown area and does have open space as well. So that was the first recommendation. The second recommendation is around, there's a formula that's utilized that we talked about on the start of the first page that really looks at the acreage per park or acreage of parkland per area of the city and compares it to population density. And so this second recommendation is a statement in the PROS plan that indicates that formula should be altered specifically for the urban central part of the city. And we thought that was probably not a good idea to alter it just for one area. And it could lead to disenfranchisement of residents who live in the urban core, particularly since that's where a lot of the density that is going into the city, at least currently, is going to. And that could shift with some of the TC1 changes that are being considered by council and planning. And so, I think regardless of where in the city the density is going, the consideration for parkland should be consistent. And so that's really what the second recommendation does, is it says, please don't alter it based on the area of the city that you're considering. And for the record, the PROS plan doesn't alter it. It just indicates that it should be. And so we're commenting that maybe that's not a good idea. The third recommendation, there's a section of this section of the PROS plan that deals with just some examples of spots of open space within the central portion of the city, and the diag is highlighted, and there are some other ones too that are highlighted as well. And so we just wanted to note that the center of the city space should also be included in that list of examples. And then the final recommendation in this area is there's a section that talks about the way that private developers and the city can form relationships to have parkland be created as part of developments or exchange or as part of development packages, if you will. And that can apply to plazas and streetscapes as well, and a variety of things. And so there's upkeep details on here, and for when they've contributed and when the DDA has contributed too. And we thought some greater detail on when that had happened would be helpful, when and where. And so just sort of providing the readers a little more feedback on that one. And I'll keep going, just finish out this page, and then I'll open it up to questions here. The next section is on the next page, 66 and 67. This is this area, credit for private open space and recreation areas. This section talks a lot about developers creating open space as part of the agreements, but it talks about open space for private use and public use, and gets into a little bit of a detailed breakdown on that. And we thought that some indications around where those had happened, as well as which are private and which are public, was probably something that would be good, at least on an example basis, to indicate where some of those things had happened. It doesn't really provide examples, it just illustrates the process. And then the next section is actually over the course, I'll stop at this point because the next section is actually over the course of several pages. It's the survey results. of several survey questions that were asked. And so that's a section sort of in its own. Alice, you've got your hand up. I'll see if there are any questions around up to this section 5 on page 66 to 67 before we go into the next area. You're muted, by the way, Alice.
Okay. As you went down from the first 4 recommendations, it kept popping up along the way about the difference between private space, open space, and public. And the DIAG is not technically public space for Ann Arbor. And I know it may sound arcane, but it is a fact that the University of Michigan doesn't have to contribute anything to our park system, doesn't have any pressure to, it's not really our public land. We can't zone it. They are a zone of their own. So I think using the DIAG as an example of public space available to the residents is a little bit shaky. And when you went on to how there are private spaces, this is a plan for public parks and open space. And I don't know how private spaces can be counted as public land and added to the inventory, counted in things like acres per population. If you want to go, my house, for instance, if I entertain people from different places, that's not public open space. My yard is, I have party on my driveway, that's not public space. But but that's an exaggeration. It's just that DIAG doesn't count, private tennis courts don't count, and things like that. So I'm not, that's my opinion, but I think there is a basis for it in that when you don't have public control over a space, it really doesn't belong to the public for use.
That's fair. I will say it does not, the area around private, there's, section 5 here deals with and acknowledges, sort of the way that the Parks Department counts or doesn't count the private areas, and there are some
Yeah, I do
nuances
see that.
here.
Yeah, I do say that that sentence down there about it
Yeah.
may not be counted. May not sounds like it could be, but may not be. But should not, would not, or is not. I'd rather have something definitive.
Okay. And then in terms of the DIAG, just around that, there is the document does indicate, and I don't know the answer to this question, as to if the DIAG is, the DIAG is open for public use unless the university, I suppose, were to shut that down.
Well, they can close their buildings, they can close their roads, they can close their driveways, it's not under our control.
Okay. We can let Stephen, let's hear your questions or comments, and then we'll see if we alter this area.
So I guess a couple of points. I gave my feedback to park staff about the whole pros document. And one of the areas that I had the most questions about was this one. I frankly think that this whole section, right? This section 5 is about land use planning and acquisition. And then this G is called parcels donated through dedication for parkland within the city. And then almost all the stuff that it talks about, in my view, could be moved to part A, which is talking about sort of the guiding principles. And when you get to the urban core point, I guess this whole section to me doesn't really fit within the topic, right? It's just kind of taking, hey, it's hard to get land in the middle of the city because it's expensive and blah, blah, blah. Which I don't, as a reader, I wasn't like somehow advancing my understanding of parkland acquisition, and everything else in this section G really seems to be going towards the criteria and the thinking around that the city employs when trying to decide whether and how to acquire parkland. So my comments to the Parks Department already are sort of inclusive of everything you've said, but kind of more, maybe more dramatic. I think they could really overhaul this section, which leads to my second comment, which is that I have some modest expectation around how much change will ultimately happen at this point in the pros plan drafting, because I guess a couple of reasons. One is it's a document that is echoing prior documents and prior pros plans, and they have a certain formula and rhythm, and it's difficult to take language that has been approved and change it, especially since it's been through planning council, planning commission, parks commission, and city council, the same language now multiple times. And so even though we could improve it, the likelihood that that changes even intended for the improvement of the document may not ultimately be embraced. And so I guess we'll see where all this ends up. I think there is, I guess to sum it up, I think there is room for improvement in that section. And if they don't take my complete overhaul, then I'd be happy if they took these kind of comments as far as clarifying what's meant in that particular section.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Alice, you get your hand up again.
Yeah, just a short comment. I think Steve and I are kind of on the same track. I'd almost, if you can't change language that has been approved over and over again, then maybe you can leave it out. I mean, there may be a different way, as Steve mentioned, to move it to a different section, which is less prescriptive or less burdened with incongruity. But that's my feeling about it. If you can't change it because it's always been done that way, then maybe delete most of it, at least the things that are not particularly coherent with the purpose and the writing or the principles. Okay.
Totally fine. Are folks comfortable with where we're at without making any changes to this document up to this point? Okay, I'm going to take that as a yes.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so we'll go to the next section. This is section 4, planning process for the pros plan. It's pages 77 through 89. And it's really, this is where a lot of the survey results come into play. And there are several survey questions. And we didn't get into the first couple of questions because we didn't have feedback on them. They don't touch on the center of the city. But starting with question 3, 3 and 4 do include pieces around downtown parks, including the center of the city. And then question 4 is it's described as an expansion of question 3, but it's actually a similar question without feedback. And so in question 3. And then there are several other questions, by the way. The demographic questions start at question 12. And so through question 10 or 11, there's policy considerations that are asked about. And so so question 3 deals with support of park improvements using public tax dollars. And so just in this first section, we suggested some wording to clarify that this first sentence, support levels for 13 park improvements based on the use of public tax dollars was something that was an important consideration, even though it's in the title. Starting off the paragraph was important, indicating that it is prioritization based on taxpayer dollar desired use. Second description deals with question 3 as well, and there are a few. Here's the data on question 3. There were 3 options for for selection by participants in this survey. And, you could see not sure, unsupportive, and supportive. The reality, unsure, is actually causing some discrepancies, because if you were to split the unsure 50-50, you end up with a scenario where some of these priorities would be changed. And this section does highlight, in a summary, both high levels of support and low levels of support. And then also highlights, doesn't highlight, but clearly if there's high and low, there's also a middle ground. And so the second recommendation deals with the fact that there is this unsure element that even if you split, it alters some of the statements in the first area. So that's the first one. Eric, I see your hand up here. I'll, if it's okay, I'll go through these four pieces and then get into your question here. The second recommendation deals with, or sorry, the third recommendation rather, deals with the high-level summaries on questions 3, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And there might be other ones, but those were certainly ones that that I noted, that the data between the questions created some inconsistency. So not so much within the question itself, but in some cases there were some things that were inconsistent from question to question. And that was sort of expanded actually in this fourth recommendation, which deals with even potentially some conflicting information. So for instance, there were several questions around the use in question, or several pieces of the survey question in question 3 that deal with the spending of taxpayer dollars on, for instance, playground areas, or let's see here, river recreation facilities. This is one that really caught my eye. There's a later question 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that, that's more open-ended, that talks about things that people would like to see improved. And some of the pieces that rank low here are highlighted in positive light in the other questions as having been feedback from the community. And so this last recommendation is basically just that there is some sort of acknowledgement around the fact that there is some conflicting feedback in the total series of survey questions, and just sort of acknowledging that is very real, frankly, and it does affect top priorities, mid-level priorities as well. And the questions are different, but there is overlapping conflict. And so I'll stop there. And Erica, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think I would encourage not including that. I don't know if it's the second bullet point or the one around the splitting of unsure into the two categories. That's just, from my understanding of sort of survey analysis, that's not how a response like that might be interpreted. It's, we don't know what respondents meant by unsure. They might mean a lot of different things. It doesn't mean that, half were supportive and half, they were leaning towards supportive, half were unsupportive. So I just think that's, it's important to note that there are perhaps high levels of folks, respondents that are unsure about something and on certain things. But I think this is kind of odd language around splitting the supportive and a non-supportive.
Would you maybe what we do is we note that there are varying levels of unsure.
Yeah, if that's not called out in the text, then that's probably an important element to weigh in on. But that's about it. I would suggest.
Yeah, just to comment, there are disagreeing opinions. So somehow it's good to kind of acknowledge that people may no matter how they rank things, they may disagree on one thing or another.
Um, Something like that, maybe, might be more appropriate. Frank,
Yes, I've noticed early on that on the question that specifically about the center of the city, if you were to remove the onshore responses and you just had the for and against, they almost identically mirror the percentage results of the Prop A vote. And in a vote where you go to the poll, you don't record people who are unsure. They just
Yeah.
maybe don't vote. So I guess that's just an observation that if you do that, and I'm not suggesting necessarily we do, but it's interesting that it's very close to the percentage of yes votes and no votes if you just take the yes and no and eliminate the unsure.
we'll keep going here then. So moving on to the next area, this is subsection D on page 95. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so this is the Downtown Parks Focus Group. I'm almost positive this is a group that I participated in. I think Erica may have participated in it. I cannot remember how many, which meetings are what now, unfortunately. I think my mind has been zoomed to oblivion. But there's a piece here that just talks about the city of Detroit, which is probably a statement that I made some variation of. And I think just some clarity around the wording here is around how Detroit intentionally engages with users of all the parks, including those experiencing homelessness, to ensure that no one is pushed out is probably an important point. And probably, this was a Zoom and I don't think it was recorded. So it was probably, based on somebody's notes, and I can see why we ended up with the comment we did. I don't think there was any ill intent or anything, but I think if we can provide some clarity there, a little more formative would probably be good. And I think it would reflect what we learned in Detroit. So subsection B, page 98, 99 is the next one. So let's see here. So this is around our group, Center of the City Task Force and Council of the Commons. There's a piece here that talks about it's actually, I think it's language directly from the designation for the Council of the Commons. I'm pretty sure this language is directly in our charge. So I think the suggestion here, it does include this piece around the relationship with PAC, which is important, and it's important that it's sort of called out too. So sort of included a recommendation that the PAC, the Parks Department staff, and the Council of the Commons are working together to support recommendations for the area designated as the center of the city block, including any alterations or use pieces. So that was another piece there. On page 102, there is this is a section that deals with goals and objectives, and this was put together, I am pretty sure, by city staff looking at a variety of plans and that come from a number of city documents. And so we thought a suggestion around park activation, not just urban park, but park activation in general, maintenance and planning, including how to do so through the use of public and private partnerships in order to reduce costs to taxpayers was something that might be a good suggestion to include. There is notes around the interest in engaging in public-private partnerships or considering the engagement at a few points throughout the document. So I think this goal would just support some of that other language that's already there. And then I'll keep going here, page 118. Okay, so this area is subsection F, neighborhood parks and urban plazas. And it talks about some feedback. There was a couple of recommendations that we had here. There was a sentence that says focusing resources on one urban park will just relocate issues to neighboring parks. And this is a section that includes feedback, I believe, from some of the survey work that's done. So I do think it's important that really not be altered, but we also thought that statement really could be misinterpreted in a negative light. And we have, in every conversation we've had, that has never been the intent and has been enumerated as it not being the intent of any sort of development or use of spaces, including things like the activation of Liberty Plaza. It's not designed to push people out of the space. And I think staff are doing a really yeoman's job to prevent that from happening. So that's an important piece. So we thought it would be good just to delete that sentence so that it was not misinterpreted as that being part of what the city's intent is in the PROS plan. The second recommendation is just enumerating city advisory bodies such as the DDA, the Council of the Commons, PAC, and city staff in the planning and programming work that is to be done in conjunction with the Downtown Park and Open Space Subcommittee report. This Downtown Park and Open Space Subcommittee report is a document that's referenced in the section. So we thought that including sort of the bodies that look at this, the downtown parks as a reference to that document, and then adding in the Center of the City's Task Force as a secondary document was probably a good additional suggestion too. And then there are several sections throughout the report. Clearly the PROS plan focuses on planning and tax dollar allocation, and there are several parts that talk about city staff, and there's even a section that indicates that sort of a insufficient amount of staff support because there are not enough staff. So maybe some acknowledgement that supports that statement, that indicates that the Council of Commons recognizes that the city is really tightly staffed, and the Parks Department in particular, and that we support a PROS plan that ensures there's sufficient staff and resources to build, activate, and maintain a city park system that enhances and reflects the vibrancy, diversity, and uniqueness of the Ann Arbor community. And so something in there that sort of supports our city staff with the fact that people are critical to actually moving these projects forward, regardless of the project, and we shouldn't expect that that this will just happen without resources and staff. So that is the last page of recommendations. Any questions at all on or concerns around these sections?
Nope.
Yes.
Yeah, I just like the comment about appreciation for staff. Now I've lost my train of thought, but it was that last paragraph. Let me kind of read it. Oh, yeah, it doesn't comment about the volunteer programs there, but there are at least two that I can think of. And I think they're listed elsewhere in the plan. I'm not sure. Maybe it's on the website that I'm thinking, but the acknowledgement of the contributions of volunteers would be a good thing to have right there with the appreciation for the staff too.
We'll add that piece. A volunteer. Community volunteers.
Thank you. It takes a village.
Yes, it
Yeah.
does. Absolutely. Any other questions or comments on this last page of recommendations? Okay, all right, so we are just a couple of days away from the end of the public comment period around submitting public comments to the Parks Department. And the purpose of the meeting was to try and just put a stamp of approval on some public comments to be submitted to Parks as part of that process. Certainly, any member of the community can submit personal remarks, but having something that came from this body was really the reason we were here and why we did this pre-work to bring these recommendations together. So kudos to everybody who submitted things, especially Rita, because she really worked hard at trying to do this and be inclusive. And so I would just like to see if we could have a motion to support submitting these recommendations as written here to the Parks Department.
I move.
Second,
All right, moved by Frank, seconded by Alice. All in favor of submitting, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
I,
All right, any opposed? Excellent. Okay, so,
Wonderful. Wonderful.
all right. And I apologize, we're not 30 minutes, but we chugged along pretty good. So appreciate everybody hanging
Can I
out.
just give one remark, Adam, about as I understand the Parks Commission process, and that we're not the only one looking at this, but we have a special meeting on January 3rd, hopefully to approve the sort of final version at that point. So the sooner that any comments get in, the better. And then what I'll do is I'll try to echo or push that the comments from this body be incorporated or considered in these last days as staff is pulling this all together. So
Thank you.
thank you,
for that.
Steve.
Great.
Thanks, Steve.
All right, we have public comment, I think, is the next item on the agenda. Heather, could you see if there's any members of the public?
Yes, Daniel, please go ahead. Daniel, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Is it *6? Please forget.
It is star. Yes, it's either *9 or *6.
Okay. Can you hear me
There he
now?
is.
Yes.
So the one point of clarification that I guess I would like is that to me, the biggest issue in this entire plan is that the center of the city, aside from the Liberty Plaza, the center of the city is not actually a park. It's not in the park's inventory. So is it the position of the Council of the Commons that that is their intent and that moving forward, they accept that that is their status, that they're not a park?
I'll go
Could the
ahead.
commenter identify themselves? I don't know who we're listening to.
Yeah,
My name is Dan Rubenstein.
Yeah, Dan, thanks for that. I'll just answer this real quick. We have not taken a position on that. So it would be up for discussion at some point, but we've not taken a position around what the designation needs to be. And I think, just speaking for me personally, that is because we are working towards what that plan looks like, and the designation would come along with that. That's my thought, at least. But we have not taken that up, and so the answer to their question is we don't have an opinion yet. formed.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
Adam, could I also add that there are several properties within the park system that are unique, as ours will be unique. And some of them are zoned differently or managed differently. So that's why we're taking a measured approach to that.
Thank you, Alice. Rita, did you have a comment on that? Or did,
Yeah, I just want to say that I would like to know that the PROS plan allows us the potential and doesn't put roadblocks in front of what we would like to do in terms of moving forward with making this an active public space. That's really a big driving force in terms of going through this document in detail to make sure that it opens doors instead of creates roadblocks.
Right.
That's what I hope. And I think that is related to what Dan said.
thank you.
well, can I still be heard?
Yes.
Yes,
I mean, the only roadblock I would say is that I do think not being a park in the PROS plan could make certain funding options more difficult in the future. So I do think there are some doors that are, if not closed, made more difficult by the status. And I would just add finally that for other areas of the city that are not designated parks and are not in the parks inventory, and the main one I'm thinking about is the tree line and all of the various parcels that might ultimately be affected by the tree line. They are in the comprehensive plan in a different form. And I think one of the issues is, if the center of the city, even though it's in the city charter called a park, if it's not in the PROS plan, it's not in the parks inventory, and it's not elsewhere in the comprehensive plan, any of the elements, where does that leave it? And especially in terms of applying for significant grant funding from grantors. I don't have any particular ones in mind, but just in general. So anyway, that's my comment.
thanks, Daniel. Heather, any other members of the public?
Yes, Jeff. You can go ahead now.
Yeah, I'll just be very brief. First, I want to thank you all. This is a very difficult task, looking at a very comprehensive PROS plan, and for you to come up with a series of recommendations and as this body agreeing to all this is fantastic. I would just add only one thing, and that is in the process of this, there is a reference to a Park Advisory Commission Downtown Parks Subcommittee report without any direct link to that. If you have not read it, please, if you have not read this, please do read it. It contains a lot of very interesting information. And by the way, a lot more support for a park. The survey conducted in this, which is in 2013, said that 76% of the people, respondents of over 1,600 people, were in favor of a downtown park. The other thing I would say is it's one thing to ask people if they were in favor of a downtown park. It's another thing to ask if there are specific things you would like a fountain downtown or seating downtown or a playground downtown. So how you draft the survey question is really important. That's all I wanted to say, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff. Any other members of the public? Okay. All right.
None with hands raised.
Okay, excellent. In that case, I will make a PDF of this document and send it to Heather, and she can include it in the minutes, and also we'll submit it to the Parks Department. And Stephen, appreciate any of your lobbying efforts in the process. And with that, we will ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Have a wonderful afternoon. Happy holidays. Enjoy your time off, and we'll see you next month. Thanks again.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night.
All right.